If the Appalachians are quiet and ancient in the east, worn down, covered by forest, and accumulating biological richness, then what are the Rockies? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods talking about nature right outside your front door. Maybe North America is outside your front door. Maybe it's not. You have things too. But time to start noticing what makes them unique and makes them a little bit different. The Rocky Mountains are amazing. I love vacationing in the Rocky Mountains. But they are younger. That means they're sharper, more dramatic. And you can see them from hundreds of miles away on a clear day. When I drive out to Colorado and we come in from the east, all of a sudden you start seeing a little lump out there. Could be anything, could be a cloud, and all of a sudden it's the Rocky Mountains. The western third of North America is completely geologically a different story than the east. It's had a much more violent history, it's much more recent in history, and it is still not finished. The Rocky Mountains are young, still rising, and they began forming while the Appalachian Mountains had already been standing. The Rocky Mountains formed through a process called uplift. Massive forces deep inside the Earth's crust pushing rock upwards. Unlike the Appalachians, the Rockies haven't been worn down yet. They still have their sharp peaks, their hanging valleys carved by glaciers, and it's still geographically active. The American West is dotted with volcanoes, hot springs, geysers, earthquake zones. Yellowstone sits over one of the largest volcanic hotspots on Earth. Mount St. Helens erupted inside of our memory. I remember when it erupted. And the Cascade Range in the Pacific Northwest is a chain of active and potentially active volcanoes. The West is not done being built yet. The rain makes the Rockies what it is. In the Sierra Nevadas, the Cascades, the Rocky Mountain ranges, they do something powerful to the weather. The moist air moves inland from the Pacific Ocean, and when it hits the mountains, the clouds are forced upwards. It rises, it cools, and what does cool air do? It can't hold as much moisture, and then it rains. Sometimes an enormous amount of rain on the western slopes. By the time that the air then crosses the mountain crests and then descends on the eastern side, it's dry. The moisture has already fallen. The land on the far side sits in what is called a rain shadow. That's why the western slope of the Cascades are some of the wettest places in North America. I've been to some of the rainforests on the western side of things. They're temperate rainforests with trees of extraordinary size. It's why Oregon, eastern Washington, the Great Basin are semi-arid desert environments, same latitude, but completely different worlds. The mountains make the difference in this particular case. The rain shower effect also explains the intermountain west. Think of Nevada, Utah, much of Idaho and Wyoming. So dry, despite being far from any sort of tropical heat source. The mountains simply intercept the moisture before it can reach the interior. The Great Basin and the West Interior, so between the Rocky and the Sierra Nevadas, lie what's called the Great Basin. It's a vast, high, dry plateau covering much of Nevada, parts of the surrounding states. It is called the Great Basin because the rivers that are here have no outlet to the ocean. They flow inwards towards the salt lakes, the desert playas, and they simply evaporate. The Great Salt Lake in Utah is the largest remnant of an inland sea called Lake Bonneville that once covered much of the region during a wetter period of time. The Earth, believe it or not, the Earth was much hotter than it is now. We are coming out of an ice age. We're still coming out of the same ice age that happened before. So the Earth is still not as warm as it used to be back when I think they said that Wyoming and stuff was a tropical zone. When you looked at that area, it was like tropics, and now it's still not that warm. But the ecology of the Great Basins is very specialized. Sagebrush, juniper, adapted wildlife, pronghorned antelopes, the fastest animals on North America for all these open spaces. It's not empty, and it's highly adaptive It looks this way because the mountains block the rain entirely. Then you get the Pacific coast. The Pacific Ocean is older, colder, and in many ways geologically more violent than the Atlantic. The Pacific rings are active geologically. The Ring of Fire, a zone of volcanoes and earthquakes that actively circle the entire ocean basin. The western coast of North America sits on this ring. The Juan de Fuca plates push under North American plates, building up the Cascades Mountains, threatening to create a mega earthquake along the Pacific Northwest coast. I stayed there once, and I saw pictures of what happened when those plates caused earthquakes before, devastated the areas where there are redwoods, devastating along the entire coast, the northern coast of it. We've been seeing a lot of geologic activity there lately, and they suspect that there is going to be a new volcano underwater off the Pacific coast in the Northwest. The Pacific Ocean also drives the climate of the entire West Coast, and I'd say the entire North America. The California current flows southwest along the coast, bringing cold water from the north down to the south. The cold water upwells deep in the ocean and brings nutrients to the surface. This upwelling is extraordinarily productive. It creates some of the richest marine life ecosystems on Earth. Kelp forests, massive fish populations, seabird colonies, sea otters, sea lions, gray whales, humpback whales. The cold, productive Pacific is alive, and it is hard to overstate how important it is. The Pacific Flyway, we've talked about some flyways in the last episode, runs along the western coast of North America and follows the coastline, the river valleys from Alaska all the way to Mexico. Shorebirds, waterfowl, raptors, songbirds move through these enormous numbers of each spring and fall. There's estuaries, like some in San Francisco Bay. I got to take a train ride from San Francisco to Sacramento and saw how amazing these estuaries really are. There's Willapa Bay in Washington, and so many coastal wetlands in Oregon, California, Sacramento. I mean, you name it, all sorts of places. And all these are critical refueling stations for birds that are migrating. The temperate rainforest is where the moisture meets the mountain. And this is one of the most remarkable ecosystems in North America. It's where that moisture hits the mountains directly. Think about the rainforest of the Pacific Northwest, the Olympic Peninsula. Amazing. Because I traveled for work, I was working in Seattle. I rented a car and I did the whole Olympic State Park or National Park loop. And it was some of the most beautiful land I've ever seen in my whole life. The western slopes of the Cascades, the coastal British Columbia, receive an enormous amount of rainfall, which produces then the Sitka spruces, the western cedars, the Douglas firs, trees of staggering size and age. I mean, it was just breathtaking. I think that's probably one of my most favorite trips I ever took. The Olympic Peninsula receives over 140 inches of rain in some locations. These forests feel ancient when you go there. They are just stunning. It's also, I think, where the vampires live, if I'm not mistaken, because they just get so many clouds. But essentially, it functions as a completely different ecosystem. And so there you'll see spotted owls, marbled murrelets, seabirds that nest in these old-growth forests miles from the ocean. Salmon connects to the ocean with the nutrient to the inland forest where they die after spawning. Feeding eagles, bears, enriching the soil of the forest from the coast. The Pacific coast is where the geology and the ocean and biology converge in one of the most dramatic ways of anywhere in the continent. So when we talk about, looking at the Canadian Shield, the Great Lakes, the Mississippi watershed, the Appalachian Mountains, the Atlantic coast, we crossed the Rocky Mountains and descended into the rainforest. And you'll notice that we skipped a lot of areas, but there are some other areas that I'd like to fill in the maps at the end of this series. The missing pieces is, let's take a look at the coastal plains of the South. This is an ancient seafloor. If you ever drive from Appalachia to the foothills towards the Atlantic or the Gulf Coast in the southeastern United States, you pass through some gradual transitions. The land gets flatter and the soil changes. The rivers slow down and they widen. The Mississippi River down there is a lot wider than it is up by me. The air is even heavier. You're descending in one of the largest coastal plains in North America. It's a broad, flat region, and it was the bottom of a shallow sea. The Atlantic and Gulf coastal plain stretches from New Jersey all the way around to Texas, and it is all underneath the land is ancient marine sediment, sand, clay, limestone, deposited when the sea levels were higher and the land was submerged. The limestone beneath much of Florida, for instance, is made almost entirely of compressed ancient marine organisms. That geology has consequences. The limestone dissolves into the water and it makes it slightly acidic. In Florida and parts of the Southeast, that's created what is called the karst landscape, riddled with sinkholes and underground rivers and springs. And the springs of Florida discharge water that has been filtered through the limestone for years, thousands of years, and emerges cold, crystal clear, and even in the middle of summer. So these springs supported an extraordinary ecosystem, including manatees that shelter in the warm spring water during winter. The flatness of the coastline also means that the rivers spread out. The wetlands form very easily in the swamps, bayous, the bottomland hard forests. The South is full of slow water, saturated ground, and that's how the geology made it. Then if you go in and you think about like before the Europeans settled that area, much of the southeastern coastal plains was covered in one of the most remarkable ecosystems out there. It's called the Longleaf Pine Savannahs. These were open, park-like forests with tall longleaf pines with a rich understory of grasses, wildflowers, and shrubs. They were maintained by frequent fires, that lightning that ignited burns and then kept the canopy always restoring itself. And it makes the understory of those trees very diverse. The longleaf pine forest once covered about 90 million acres across Southeast America, from Virginia all the way to Texas. Today, it's about less than 3% of the original extent. It's one of the most dramatically reduced ecosystems in North American's history. I wish I would have been able to see that. And if you lived in these forests at that time, it was extraordinary. You would have seen woodpeckers that we no longer have that were exclusive to this area, gopher tortoises that dig burrows used by dozens of other species, Bachman sparrows, eastern indigo snakes, box turtles. This long leaf system supported a web of life that is primarily now gone, surviving only in scattered little areas and military bases where basically the ecosystem hasn't been disturbed, strangely enough. I grew up in one of these military bases and there's not much, you don't have businesses and you don't have, I'm not saying businesses are bad, but you know what I mean? You just don't have the development in the same way. The loss of the longleaf is one of the most ecologically great stories of this continent. And I've never heard of it before until I started doing research into the way our continent was built. But it happened so gradually over so many generations that no one is left alive today who ever saw what the whole thing looked like. And then we talk about the Gulf that is often treated like a backdrop, but it is so much more than we give it credit for. It is primarily one of the engines that drives the climate in the entire United States. When we get rain here in the North Woods, it is because moisture was pulled up from the Gulf of Mexico. Our moisture does not come from the Pacific Ocean. It comes from the Gulf. It's a semi-enclosed sea, warmer than the open Atlantic, and its warmth has two consequences to it. It feeds moisture into the atmosphere. The dominant weather pattern across central United States pulls warm, humid air northwards out of the Gulf towards places like me, and that moisture fuels thunderstorms of the Great Plains, rainfall in the Midwest, the weather system that moves across this country during warm season. Without the Gulf, the interior of the continent would be dramatically drier. I can tell you that, like I said, we do not get our moisture from the Pacific. We get it from storms tapping into the Gulf. It might be the same storm system that comes off of California and comes my way, but it's drawing moisture from a different location. Secondly, the warm Gulf water fuels hurricanes, tropical storms that enter the Gulf and intensify over that warm, shallow water. The Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida has been shaped by centuries of hurricanes, some of which that have made landfall, which is part of why the coastal ecosystem is so resilient and strange. The cypress swamps, the salt marshes, the banyan trees, the barrier islands, they're built to be disturbed by these hurricanes and then recover. They depend on these disturbances in a way that most ecosystems do not want disturbances. The Mississippi Delta, it meets the Gulf. Something remarkable happens. The river, after draining roughly 40% of the continental United States water, finally slows down, and it slows and drops its sediment load. All the silt and clay that's been carried from my neck of the woods, from the plains, all the way down to the Gulf. And that sediment reaches the Mississippi Delta. The Delta is not a fixed landform like we think of land being. It is constantly being built and constantly subsiding over thousands of years. The river has shifted course repeatedly, building new globes of land, abandoning old ones, and creating a mosaic of marshes, bayous, barrier islands, and open water that is among some of the most biologically productive places on Earth. The coastal marshes of Louisiana are nursery habitats for Gulf fish, shrimp populations. They are critical stopovers for migrating birds. The mudflats, the marshes on the Gulf are important to Central and Mississippi flyways, as any wetland, as even north of there. We need places along the whole path, right? Birds can't make it that long. And sometimes they subside, they erode, or sometimes they drown. And the rate at which they change makes that landscape look different all the time. The Delta is a reminder that land is not permanent, and it is made and unmade by water continuously. Every spring, then, there's one of the most dramatic events in North America that happens largely invisible to most people. Songbirds, it's not invisible to me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Warblers, tanagers, orioles, thrushes, vireos, flycatchers cross the Gulf of Mexico in a single flight overnight. They leave the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico at dusk and fly northwards, 600 miles of open water, arriving in Texas and Louisiana the following morning. When conditions are good, the bird lands, they disperse quickly and restock their fuel systems. They eat, they rest a little bit, they're exhausted. They pile up on the first tree that they reach, and they wait there while the headwinds are doing it. Birders call these events fallouts. A single grove of live oaks on the Texas coast area can hold hundreds of warblers, all moving at once, feeding frantically. And it's one of the most astonishing wildlife spectacles on this continent. And it happens because the geography of the Gulf creates a crossing point for them. The birds have no choice but to cross. The Gulf is so wide that you can't get around it easily, and so the narrow coastal fringes on either side of their landfall means hours of flying over open sea. But geography concentrates the life. The Gulf makes that happen every spring. Eventually, they get to my neck of the woods, and then I'm out there, like I was for the last 3 weeks, on vacation, watching all those birds that had landed in the Gulf eventually make it to my area. I am watching forecasts and bird maps like a hawk, and trying to pinpoint the exact day they get here. One day we'll get 100,000 birds fly over. The next day we'll get 14 million birds fly over, and it has to do with the weather system at that moment. If the wind is coming from the south, it pulls those birds up. They use the winds to ride all the way up. If it's pushing from the north, then the birds will stay closer, have shorter flights, and not move very quickly. That's what happened this year. So let's take a look, too, at the Great Plains. It gets a reputation of a boring place to drive through. I've driven through the Great Plains many times to get to other places in the United States, and they can be long hauls. But the Great Plains stretch from the Canadian prairies south through the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, into Texas, the vast interior of grasslands, one of the greatest ecosystems of the world. It supported 60 million bison, along with pronghorn, elk, wolves, grizzly bear, black-footed ferrets, prairie dogs, and an amazing amount of grassland birds. The plains are not flat. They roll. They have a gentle form to them. They grade from tall grass prairies in the moister east to where the grass grows taller than a person on horseback, to a mixed grass prairie that's a little bit shorter in the middle, and then a short grass prairie on the drier west, where the rain was already sapped out by the Rocky Mountains. Each zone has its own ecology, its own species, and its own character. And think of it this way. The prairie dogs create this vast underground cities. They aerate the soil. They support the predators that are there. Fire moves across the landscape and constantly resetting the area, keeping this grasslands open. For the most part, the tall prairie grasses are gone and are covered with crops. It's a very rich area to grow. The mixed and short grass prairies have survived in larger fragments, and the bison are pretty much gone from most of it. What remains is an altered landscape of surviving grassland patches. And because it's not as covering, there's more ground that is left uncovered. A lot more wind erosion and rain erosion can happen too. The plains still matter for birds. The central flyway follows the Great Plains north to south. The sandhill cranes congregate on the Platte River in Nebraska by hundreds of thousands each spring. One of the greatest wildlife spectacles in the world. I have seen fields of thousands of sandhill cranes, and it's stunning, and the noise is amazing. So I'm really glad I got a chance to see that. Shorebirds use the shallow playas in the southern plains. The grassland birds like the bobolinks, the dick thistles, the eastern and western meadowlarks, the upland sandpiper, and several species of longspurs breed in the prairie habitat. The plains themselves are a world unto themselves. It's one of the most stunning things to look at when you know what to look at. And then comes the desert Southwest. And we often have this imagination of like the red rocks, the saguaro cactus, dry heat. The American Southwest contains at least 4 distinct desert ecosystems, each shaped by a different geography, different rainfall patterns, and different temperature regimes. Essentially, the Sonoran Desert is on southern Arizona that extends into Mexico. It's one of the lushest American deserts, which is kind of a word when I was writing, and I'm like, deserts aren't lush. But they receive 2 rainy seasons, a winter rain from the Pacific and then the summer monsoon rains from the Gulf. The dual moisture pulses allows the saguaro cactus to exist. A plant so large and so long-lived, it requires both wet seasons and dry seasons to survive. The Sonoran is full of life. Roadrunners, Gila woodpeckers, elf owls nesting in saguaro cavities, javelinas, coyotes, rattlesnakes, and just an astonishing diversity of cactus and desert wildflowers. Then there's the Chihuahuan Desert, which lies east of that, straddling the U.S.-Mexico border, West Texas, New Mexico, and deep into Mexico itself. This is higher elevation than the Sonoran. It's cooler. It receives its moisture from the summer monsoons, and it's dominated by other types of grasses and biological diversity. And it's one of the largest North American deserts. It is the most biodiverse in the world, and most people don't know really much about it. The Mojave Desert is in Southern California and Nevada and is the driest in the summer, hottest in the North American desert. Death Valley sits within the Mojave Desert, the lowest, hottest, driest places in North America. The Mojave Desert receives almost all of its rain in winter. It is a signature plant is the Joshua tree. Maybe you've seen pictures of it. The species of yucca that almost looks like something from a different planet. The Mojave is stark, extreme, and the ecology around it reflects that. The Great Basin Desert, which we touched on briefly, lies between the Sierra Nevada and the Rockies. It's a cold desert, high elevation, frigid winters dominated by sagebrush. It's one of the largest deserts in North America by area and the least understood. 4 deserts, 4 different climate regions, 4 different ecological communities, and 4 different reasons about why they are desert. The Southwest is not just one place. The Colorado River then runs through the heart of the Southwest, and it's the most consequential river, I think, in North America, apart from the Mississippi. I'm biased in that. The Colorado River begins high in the Rockies of Colorado, Wyoming, and flows 1,500 miles before reaching the Gulf of California, and flows southwest for nearly 1,500 miles before reaching the Gulf of Canada in Mexico, or it used to. Today, the water is so diverted from Colorado for agriculture that the cities rarely get to, the water rarely reaches the sea. The Colorado is extraordinary. The Colorado Plateau rose, lifting, like I said, geological forces. The river kept cutting downwards, maintaining its course, cutting that rock. Water can cut rock. And the result is the Grand Canyon, 277 miles long and up to 18 miles wide and over a mile deep. The walls of the Grand Canyon expose nearly hundreds of layers of rock down as you're looking at it. The canyon is a spectacle. It's beautiful to see. I mean, it's stunning if you ever get a chance to see it. But each layer is a record, telling a different story. Shallow seas, river deltas, deserts, volcanoes, and reading the canyon walls is reading Earth's history, geologic history. The Colorado also created through sedimentation and flooding. The wetlands and the riparian corridors of the desert Southwest created this particular river valley. Cottonwoods, willows along the desert river support an extraordinary concentration of breeding birds in a somewhat otherwise dry landscape. Ribbons of green land are some of the most important bird habitats in the region. There's something that is least known about, and I never heard of it, and like I said, until I started doing this research, called Sky Islands, and it happens in the American Southwest, rising out of the Sonoran and Chihuahuan deserts of southeastern Arizona, southwestern New Mexico, northern Mexico, and they stand out as islands in a sea of desert. As you climb these mountains, you'll pass through multiple ecological zones: desert scrub at the base, oak woodlands, pine forests, spruces, fir forests at the summit. Each zone has its own community of plants and trees. And because each of the mountain ranges are isolated and separated by the next range with miles of desert, each species is a little bit different on each of these sky islands as they separate it out, independently living there for many years. The result is an extraordinary biodiversity of species found nowhere else on Earth. The population of the same species have diverged into distinct subspecies on different mountain ranges. I came across one of these. I was driving through New Mexico once, and I couldn't understand it. Like, we were in the middle of the desert, and suddenly there was this mountain here. And I'm like, why is this mountain here? And I could see that there was actually snow up in the top of the mountain, yet we were in the midst of a hot desert. It's an incredible thing. So these sky islands are meeting zones between the North America and Mexican fauna, that there are all sorts of different birds, buff-collared nightjars, violet-crowned hummingbirds. I'd love to see one of those. They're so pretty in the picture. And species that reach the northern edge of these ranges in these mountains. For birders, these sky islands of the southeastern Arizona are among the most compelling destinations on the continent. It's a very small area, but has a lot going on with them. Then we can also think about the monsoons of the American Southwest. Now, people think of the American Southwest as simply just dry. I do. I'm like, the world should be green, not brown, but it is so dry, and I just evaporate. But the North America monsoons, which I've never seen, arrive in July, and they bring a dramatic shift of weather. Moisture flows from the Gulf of California and basically takes this baked, dry landscape, and they receive thunderstorms, sometimes violent thunderstorms, but they're always spectacular. The desert responds almost immediately. The dormant plants green up. The dry, washed areas fill with water. Toads that have been buried underground for months emerge in that first rain. Wildflowers bloom. The birds that have been silent through the brutal, dry heats of May and June begin to sing again. And the monsoons just aren't rainfall. They're a reset to this whole pulse of desert life. The Sonoran Desert is extra ordinary diversity in life is part because it has 2 chances a year, winter rains and summer monsoons, to grow and reproduce. So the monsoons will drive in enormous lightning storms that start wildflowers, shape the forest structure that have been part of the Southwest for a long time. And the last area we're going to talk about is Alaska. Alaska is a whole other piece of cake up there. It's enormous. It's larger than Texas and California and Montana combined. It has more coastlines than the entire lower 48 states. It has the highest peak in the continent, Denali, used to be called Mount McKinley. I thought it was my mountain, which is over 20,000 feet. Active volcanoes in the Aleutian chains, and it has a tundra, a boreal forest, and temperate rainforest, glaciers, and an Arctic coast. The interior of Alaska is a boreal forest, the same as the northern forests that stretch across Canada, Siberia, Scandinavia, spruce, birch. There's moose, wolves, lynx, wolverines, caribou that migrate in herds in the open tundra. And it is a rival to the great African migrations that they have there. The Arctic coast of the Alaska and the northern Canada is tundra, treeless, underneath permafrost. It means the ground never thaws, brutally cold winters, and alive with birds in summer. The shorebirds from every flyway in the world practically converge in this Arctic tundra breeding ground. The Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta in western Alaska are one of the most important waterfowl nesting areas in the entire world, with ducks, geese, swans that will spend their entire winter across the continent. The Pacific coast of Alaska, the Panhandle, in the Gulf of Alaska is one of the most productive marine environments on Earth. The confluence of cold Pacific air, the nutrients upwelling from the deep of the ocean support a staggering amount of population of salmon, halibut, herring, marine mammals, seabirds that feed on them. Humpback whales, orcas, stellar sea lions, tufted puffins, and millions of other seabirds nesting along their rocky shore. We had one of their seabirds come and visit us this winter. It was called a harlequin duck. It wasn't supposed to be here. It came here and visited. Beautiful. So Alaska is a world of most Americans have never seen. And I have 3 states left on my list of states, and Alaska is one of them, and I plan on going there. But it is deeply connected to the rest of the continent. The salmon that spawns in Alaska fertilizes the forest. The shorebirds that nest on its tundra will winter in the coasts of California, the Gulf Coast, and South America. The glaciers feed the rivers. The weather system influences the entire North Pacific. So it's not separate. It anchors really the whole part of it. So we've been around this whole piece. We touched the Canadian Shield, the boreal forest, and its own recognition. The boreal forest is sometimes called a taiga, and it is one of the largest terrestrial biomes on Earth. It circles the entire northern hemisphere, Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, Siberia. Canada's portion alone covers 1 billion acres. It's not just wilderness, as most people think of it. I kind of think of it like that. It does things that are amazing. It stores a ton of carbon. It is the boreal peat bogs, the wetlands that have accumulated organic material for thousands of years, and that it recycles the water across the entire hemisphere. It feeds the Arctic Ocean. It produces birds. The boreal forest, we have what we call boreal sparrows here. So there are sparrows that I saw on my vacation these last couple of weeks. They're gone. They're boreal forest sparrows. It's the breeding ground for nearly 3 billion birds, more than half of the bird species that migrate through North America, primarily in the boreal forest. Warblers, sparrows, thrushes, shorebirds, waterfowls, raptors, every flyaway on the continent is fed by birds that spent their summers in the vast boreal forests. That's where they all went. So I told you that I spent my last 3 weeks looking for birds as they were coming here. Where did they go? Because they're gone now. Last night, there were birds that were here. They're gone. They weren't here today. So if you watch a yellow-rumped warbler in your backyard in September, there's a reasonable chance that it hatched in a spruce bog in northern Canada. The connection with that bird and then those distant forests is amazing. So let's bring back all these things that we talked about. The ancient glaciated north, its shield, its rocks, the Appalachian mountains, old, rounded, extraordinary. The Atlantic coast with its estuaries, the Rockies and the Pacific with young, dramatic mountains and the rain shadow causing the west to be wet and the east to be dry. The south, the deserts, the plains, the subarctic, and the boreal north, each of these are distinct, and each of these have their own geology, their own climate story, their own ecological communities. They are all connected. And I think of them as the birds connect them all, flying between the boreal forest and the breeding grounds. And these birds kind of connect them all, since I'm into birds, flying from the boreal forests to the breeding grounds in the Gulf Coast, to crossing the neck and going towards South and Central America, sometimes intercepting one of these sky islands to get there. The rivers connect them, the Colorado carving the canyons, the Mississippi carrying sediment from the Rockies to the Gulf, the rivers in Alaska carrying ocean nutrients into the forest. The weather connects them, the Gulf moisture feeding Midwest thunderstorms, the Pacific currents moderating western climates, and the Arctic air pushing southwards in winter to scour the plains. North America is a collection of separate places in a system, and every part of it influences every other part of it. The glaciers that formed thousands of years ago in what was now Minnesota are the wetlands that shape the sandhill cranes that they're standing in right now. The monsoon rains that fell in Arizona last July fed the cottonwood trees where the vermilion flycatchers build its nest. The salmon that died in the Alaskan River last fall put nitrogen into the soil that grew the spruce tree where the warbler is singing this morning. Geography is the story of North America, and I found it just amazing, and I hoped you did too. I know this is a whirlwind tour of the geography of North America. One thing that you'll notice, I like to watch videos of people who are from other parts of the world and their first time visiting America. And they go to the cities, of course, and they go to New York and Los Angeles. But when they get out into the countryside, that's when they all gasp. I had no idea this was America. This was North America. And I appreciate you watching. Jill from the North Woods. This is why I love North America so much. And every time I go on a trip, I try to appreciate the thing that's right there in front of me. You can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. Thank you for being out there.